Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To some of y'all, and peace out to the rest of you. Already know who it is and who it ain't. The blackest hearted, blackest minded, blackest man on social media, signing black in. Shine it again. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. I apologize for the slight wind noise, but there's a bit of a breeze. But you're actually going to hear the car and AC in a minute because I'm running an errand. I figure this is as good a time as any to go ahead and give y'all this info. So, to make a long story short, I recorded my last upload, which is a reply to Sergeant Willie Pete and his analysis of the Somali identity crisis. And I recorded that before I heard his video regarding the Y chromosome and the genetic evidence that Arab men were having sex in Eastern Africa and the Horn and conceiving babies with East African women, and that the reverse did not happen. Now that is a valid point. It doesn't negate Islam, just as if white men had done the same in Africa, that would not necessarily negate Christianity. Unless, of course, there's something in Christianity that calls against this and it happened anyway. I say this partially because, one, I want to be fair. And I want to concede valid points that SWP makes, even if tomorrow he decides he hates me. That is a valid point. I want to say this to the Somali community. I don't believe in making or I don't believe in using sex in order to ignore other issues. That's not how I generally roll. But I am going to say this unabashedly, even to the Somali community. And if it gets back to my wife, that there's this guy, this ajnabi married to a Somali that said this, well, so be it. Matter of fact, I'll tell her after I'm done recording. If, in fact, that DNA is accurate, some question it, I'm of the opinion that most of it is, I'm of the opinion that it's at least as accurate as people can make it. Like, I don't think geneticists are sitting up here tweaking everything and funging DNA data or interpreting it just to fit certain narratives. I don't necessarily think that's the case yet. But I want to specify this. If it is true that after Islam, Arab men could go into the Horn and they could get down with Somali women, usually I'm sure it would have been in a marriage, and that you knew further muck and well, or your ancestors knew further muck and well, that Somali men could not have gone and gotten with Arab women, even back then during ancient times, then you got some explaining to do. Because we know how many of you felt just a decade ago about ajnabi men marrying Somali women. And some still feel this way. The other thing too is that this did not seem, no geneticist has ever said that certain tribes don't have this. Now, if there was a particular tribe and it was only them that did this, or let's say there was a particular tribe and they were the only ones that did not. I don't want to include any tribes that did not participate in this, and I don't want to exonerate any tribes that did. And I say that because either at that point in time, you were not as against miscegenation as you were in more recent decades, up until recent decades, and that changed later on, or you were and you made an exception for Arabs. And I'd like to know which one it is. Maybe you don't know. A lot of you modern day listeners may not know about that, and it's not your fault anyway. This happened before you or I or even your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents were born, because this would have happened in between 1400 years ago and today. Now, I'm not sitting up and saying that your phenotype necessarily reflects Arab ancestry, because I hold that the so-called Arab phenotype actually is an East African phenotype. That's what I hold. I still believe that, and that is also because the Tutsi in Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi are also descendants of Somalis that went into Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi today, and wound up becoming who we know as the Batutsi, but they took on the Hutu language and the religion. However, the phenotypical difference was there from even before Belgian colonization. That's been there a while. Some of the first known cases of any Africans being obsessed with phenotype and facial features was there, actually. And this is even before Belgian colonization. So in any case, I'm going to point out that I don't blame you modern day for what happened, but I do want to know what the reason was. Because you got a strong oral history, and I want to understand why, if other African men were not seen as fit, even when they were Muslim, to marry Halymos, then why were Arab men not from Africa, and who back then may not have even looked African anymore, or they may have, could have gone either way, were seen as fit to do so? Now, understand that there was one man from Oman, and he might have been a black Omani back then, or he might not have been. I understand that there was one Omani man that migrated to what's now Somalia, and he became the ancestor to a lot of modern-day Somalis. And that's one guy. But I don't know that he's the ancestor to various tribes. There's not a particular tribe singled out as having no Arab blood in them. I was not told if the Bantu have any Arab blood or no Arab blood in them. I was not told if that's the case. And you can't use the phenotype to tell me if they do or not, because as I've said, your phenotype, the Hamite phenotype with the thinner nose, was there already even before the Arabs came in, before Islam. Now, SWP, I still hold to what I said about how Islam spread in that region. If they had to conquer India and Pakistan, so be it. I don't care. I don't apologize for that. Part of the reason why you're hearing different things about the way Islam spread is because there is a political spread, and then there is an individual conversion, and those are two different things, and people don't tend to get clear about that. Politically speaking, Islam's boundaries generally spread by conquest, and I don't apologize for that, because if you believe that the faith is true and it was designed for all of mankind, you know then that everybody else is going to come against it. And this has something to do with why I think that you really don't favor either religion. At least you're consistent. But as for why you don't favor religion in general, my understanding is, plain and simply put, you do not want the discipline. But I'll come back to that later, inshallah. However, individual conversions do have to be individual, and they must be by consent, because then that conversion is not valid. If somebody accepts Islam by force, then it's not a valid conversion. And if they later on explain that they were converted by force, but they're not actually Muslim, they're not executed as apostates. I mean, they may need to show some evidence to that claim, but no, they're not executed as apostates if there's any evidence to substantiate it. An individual conversion does have to be of one's own free will. Yes, there is a jizya. It's not been collected in God knows how long, but yeah, it's encoded in the law. I'll make no apologies for that either. Because in all honesty, I had a similar idea before I even understood what a jizya was. Before I was Muslim, I was thinking, we should go in, and everybody that's not African but wants to live in Africa should have to pay something. They should have to pay something that African people don't have to pay, or they can sign an affidavit stating that they are of African origin until it can be verified by DNA, because at the time I said this, DNA tests were not as accurate as they are today. The technology was still being developed. So I had something similar to the idea of a jizya, but it was based on race. And it was exactly for the same reasons you understood why I would say something like that, because of everybody else's attitude towards us. Largely because other men could go in and marry African women and nobody would bat an eye, and then as soon as an African man married a non-African woman, those other groups of people say, what the F? There's a comedian in the UK, black comedian. He's hot now. He's married to a Pakistani British woman. They're both Muslim. This man said when he would go to his wife's country with her and they were out together, people would stare at them like, why she marry him? And was shocked because they did not see black men married to anybody lighter than themselves. When he would go to his parents' country, which is ironically Nigeria, and no, he's not from the South. He's not one of those trash-talking Lagosians. When he would go with her to that country, nobody would bat an eye. They may have been shocked to see it, but they certainly wouldn't stare or frown or furrow their eyebrows or anything of that nature. And this is part of the reason why I say we are simply better people than those who are on average lighter than us. I confess that. Even if that's not flattering to me, to myself because of my complexion, I still don't mind saying that this race, even if I am not considered to be a part of that same race in 5 years from now, I still say in general, they're better people. Not because of DNA, but simply because we don't go and dehumanize everybody else. And even if I've ever been dehumanized in the States because of my phenotype, it was a reaction to what happened to us. I still won't tolerate that though. I'm gonna let y'all know now, when I go back to the States, if anybody decides to single me out for mistreatment and I can't beat you, then I will kill you. I will not. That doesn't mean I'm gonna tolerate any crap. I stopped doing it in my teens. And that's done. And I'm not gonna wear a pair of handcuffs either for it. But that's a different topic for a different day. What I want y'all to keep in mind though, SWP, I also want you to understand. While I will admit to a point that has something to back it up, I also want to say that I'm not going to join in on attacks of Islam. I'm not even going to do that necessarily for Christianity or any faith that has some sort of revelation to back it up. I will say that I do not take Christianity as my religion, and I do assert that the Old Testament and New Testament have been tampered with. I assert that, yeah, they've been tampered with. And you mentioned that too because you learned some of that from a Latvian that you dated. And I'm also going to say this, because you mentioned a Latvian that you dated, not me. Now, number one, the Muslim women you dated, the Northern Sudanese and the Somali woman you dated, if they dated you already, they cannot properly represent Islam to you. Now, they can admit that they're not supposed to be dating and let alone fornicating with you. And that wouldn't make them non-Muslim, but it makes them wrong. And they can admit that that's wrong. And it's the same thing when a Muslim man fornicates with any woman, Muslim or not. He can admit that that's wrong, but he cannot properly represent Islam to her while he's fornicating with her. That's out. So I want you to understand, those two women cannot properly represent Islam to you. But I gotta ask this. If you say that Islam was introduced to Africa and did no good for it, which is not true, but I'm gonna let the Sankofa Institute, I believe that's the name, I'll let you do more research on that. Now, I've already said where y'all can look. Naeem Abdullah is one example in Philadelphia. In Pittsburgh. He knows exactly what it did, the good that it did. Rudolph Bilal Ware also is a good person to look up. I believe he's a professor. He's not an imam, but a professor. So there are black Muslims who do not kiss up to the Arabs, and they're glad to be African. And they're African American. Ironically, they're more happy to be African than many non-Muslim African Americans. And they will tell you what good Islam did for Africa. Without Arabs' input. Now, when you research that, SWP, and it's not just you, but others of the similar mindset, and I used to be that mindset. When you research that and find out, I got to ask you two questions then. Number one, if Islam did this good for Africa that you're going to find out, what's wrong with it? Number two, if Islam was so bad for Africa and Christianity was so bad for Africa, how does it help Africa to be with a Latvian woman, even if you're not with her anymore? maybe it doesn't hurt Africa because you're one person. I get that, but how does it help? How does it help the diaspora at all? Now I say this, we're either pro-black or we're not. And if it's wrong for me to jump over a black Muslima to marry a non-black Arab woman, and I would say that that probably would be wrong over here because the black women from here are not a problem. And since whites talk about, white Arabs, Arabs that call themselves white, do say something about protecting the white race, pretty much just meaning marrying white. I say that, yeah, here we should look into protecting the black race by marrying each other. And we should be shunning marriage to any Arab that calls themselves white, unless there's going to be a 1-for-1, meaning if that man marries from a black family, then a man from the black family gets to marry from that man's same family. I'm okay with that. Just to be fair. Because really, we're not allowed to ban a marriage on a racial or origin-based reason anyway. We're not allowed to. However, as we know, black people aren't the ones doing it. It's whites and those who call themselves white. Or those who are just whiter than us. It's always the way that goes. And that unidirectional nature of racism and colorism is a reason to get angry. And I can see why you would be angry about that. You got every right to be. But if, in fact, you do the research and find the benefits that Islam did bring to black West Africa, and no, East Africa wasn't conquered either, the political boundaries of Islam spread to North Africa, yes. But if you're going to be outraged about that, the question is, were those North Africans black at that time? That's the question you have to ask. At that time in history, were they black? And I don't really know to what extent they were and to what extent they were not. I'm not sure. But if you're going to be outraged about even the so-called Islamic Arab conquest of North Africa, you're going to have to answer that. Because according to you, with my phenotype, I'm not black. Captain Solo's not black, and he's got a black parent. I got 2 parents that are classified as black. Don't know any white ancestors, but according to you, I would not be black. So if, in fact, the North Africans were not mostly black at that time, then it doesn't matter. It's not our business, according to what you yourself have said. But if you find that Islam did this good for black West Africa, and I'm sure it happened for black East Africa too, if that is the case, then you also got to ask yourself, do you really have a problem with Abrahamic faiths in general because they were bad for Africa, or because you believe there were multiple gods, or because you believe that the ancestors are gods, or is it because you don't like the rules of discipline imposed? Meaning you can't just go and put your Johnson in a women willy-nilly, all puns intended. But which also means that men can't do the same thing to ours too. Is it really the rules and the self-discipline? Do you hate the idea of not being able to drink? Having to wake up before the sun comes up to say the first prayer? Having to fast for 30 days during Ramadan unless you're traveling or sick, or until you get old? Do you really have a problem with these things? Do you hate the idea of having to travel to Saudi Arabia to perform the Hajj in Mecca and be around a bunch of crowd of people, and the logistical nightmare that can present sometimes? Are these the things that you hate? Be honest with yourself, because a lot of people who have that problem don't really admit to themselves that that's what the problem is. But at least be honest with yourself in doing the study, because I can understand the frustration that other Muslims can bring. But I can tell you, as someone who used to be just like you and who is now Muslim and happy to be so, the religion is not what brings the problems. That's where the problems get solved. And you are not required to even validate anything Arab or coming from the Arabs. I hope that this helps out too. Thank you all for listening. Black heart, black mind, black out. And now you know why I say Assalamu alaikum and black heterosexual non-select male power, and why I say black patriarchy until extinction or judgment day.